of the day on Liberia. I figured out how to have a full screen on my live stream. Finally figured that out. So, I hope everybody is doing well. I hope all is well from wherever you guys are tuning in. I know it's late South Africa time, past 11 p.m., so a lot of you guys are probably headed off to bed. Anyways, hope everybody's doing well. Gonna talk about Liberia. I talked about it a little in the last live stream, but found out it's Black History Month here in the United States. And one of the things I found interesting about my home state with that is that, okay, you have Prospect Hill Plantation in Jefferson County, Mississippi. That county incorporates the cities of Fayette and Lorman. Lorman's where Alcorn State University is. But in the 1800s, there was this American Revolution veteran from South Carolina named Isaac Ross. Isaac Ross fought in the American Revolution as an artilleryman, and he had enough wealth and enough. He probably could have avoided fighting, but he believed in the U.S. cause for independence. Some of the people that he freed before he came to Mississippi and South Carolina, some of the slaves that he freed fought alongside him in the American Revolution. So he brought them down to Mississippi and helped get them land and helped get them set up. But they were freed before he got to Mississippi. Well, he eventually relocates these slaves to Liberia, and I'm going to explain that. This is a stream about Africa. Okay, he relocates the slaves to Liberia. All right, and in his will, when he died in Mississippi, you could not free your slaves in Mississippi if they weren't relocated to Liberia when the Mississippi Colonization Society was created, and that was like a branch of the American Colonization Society. If they weren't relocated to Liberia, then they were going to be sold to the highest bidder. So in his will, he leaves his slaves money, all his money, and then he leaves some money to the American Colonization Society to arrange transport for them to Liberia. Well, the children contest that will. His kids contest the will. The slaves are upset, and rightfully so, because he believes that slaves helped make him wealthy, and they helped him out a lot. And when Isaac Ross owned the slaves, he didn't break up the slave families. He secretly taught them how to read and write. He educated them. So the children contest the will, so it's tied up in the Mississippi courts for a long time, so the slaves couldn't relocate. Well, the slaves are angry with the kids, and they try to burn down the plantation. And Eric Olskip says, hi, Brett, interesting piece of history you have discovered. Yeah, I discovered this actually a couple of days ago, and I actually lived only 4 miles north of Jefferson County, so it's not a common knowledge of my state, but I wish it was. Well, the slaves contest the will. I mean, the slaves are upset with the kids because the kids contested the will. The slaves tried to burn the plantation house to the ground with Isaac Ross's children and grandchildren in it, but only 2 of them die. And then they tried to poison them as well, but that wasn't successful. So the kids get a hold of the law enforcement authorities. The law enforcement authorities don't have a trial. They just go ahead and lynch 11 of them. But the slaves are actually able to appeal this to the Mississippi Supreme Court, and the Mississippi Supreme Court upholds Isaac Ross's will. They say he wanted his slaves to be willed the money and the transport back to Africa. That's where it's going to go. Well, they relocate to a colony in Liberia, and the colony is called Mississippi Colony of Liberia. It's eventually absorbed into the nation of Liberia. It's absorbed in the nation of Liberia. And the settlement for the longest time was called Mississippi. Now, there's this Mississippi author named Alan Huffman who wrote a book called Mississippi and Africa, and that deals with the Prospect Hill Plantation and Isaac Ross and the will and the slaves that are relocated to Liberia. Well, the slaves get relocated to Liberia, and it's not all smooth sailing. A lot of people who have settled in Liberia have died of tropical diseases. that they really had no immunity to. And they were really not welcomed by the African natives who were already in Liberia. They had tribal governments at the time, and a lot of the native Africans were very hostile to the freed slaves, and vice versa. Well, Isaac Ross's slaves set up their own plantations, and did they enslave some native Africans? Yes, but one of the things, like, they really did not like the Mandingo tribe. The Mandingo tribe had slaves of their own, and the Americo-Liberians were trying to quell the slave trade because the United States had abolished the slave trade with Africa in 1808, but there was a lot of illegal slave trading still going on, and a lot of the native Liberians, the Mandingos, the Vi tribe, they sold a lot of slaves to Middle Easterners, and the Middle Easterners took it back to the Middle East, and upon arriving in the Middle East, a lot of times those people were castrated, and they enslaved their own tribal members as well, and they also enslaved rival tribe members. Well, there was a lot of hostility with between the Americo-Liberians and the native African tribes in that instance. And also now the Americo-Liberians did want to Christianize the Vi tribe as well as the Mandingo tribe, but the Mandingo tribe and the Vi tribe were Muslims. That's why Liberia to this day is about 12% Muslim. And they tried to they resented conversion processes. Now, the Grebo tribe practiced traditional African religions, and the Americo-Liberians, which is what the freed slaves were called, or the free blacks who relocated to Liberia, they converted the Grebo tribe, but the Grebo tribe wanted their own independent government upon conversion. And so they suppressed a Grebo rebellion. There were also a lot of laws in place trying to prohibit tribal languages to be used even in day-to-day affairs. Also, there were a lot of that native Liberian women could not, they had to cover themselves before going into the cities. A lot of times the cities' public nudity became against the law. That happened as well. But again, most of the hostilities were because most of the casualties were due to tropical diseases that they had no immunity to, but there was warfare and there was suppression by the Americo-Liberians. Now, with that being said, the Americo-Liberians only made up 5% of Liberia's population when Liberia became a country. And it became its own country and independent from the United States on July 26th, 1847. And the tribes that were already there did not rule in a country, but they ruled in tribal government, and a lot of them grew pepper, and they had already traded pepper with the Portuguese, a little bit with the English, so a lot of them knew some European languages when the Americo-Liberians had arrived. But about 1/3 of all freed slaves and one third of free blacks died due to tropical diseases that they had no immunity to. And Liberia became independent again on July 26, 1947 from the United States. And the United States, for the longest time, did not recognize the nation of Liberia because the Americo-Liberians had such an oppressive system on the native Liberians and did implement slavery. But however, a lot of that was because they were resenting the Mandingo and the Vi tribe trading slaves, which they basically did. And there was a lot of rival tribe warfare where slave trading did go on, and they were trying to suppress the slave trade. Did they go too far? Absolutely, they went too far. Now, with that being said, the first president of Liberia was a guy named Joseph Jenkins Roberts. Now, he was only 1/8 black. He looked white, but they had a 1-drop rule that if you, during that time, and this was mainly the Democrats who did this, but if you were had 1 drop of African blood, you were considered African or African American. And Joseph Jenkins Roberts had relocated from Virginia to Liberia, and he was Liberia's first president. So he became Liberia's first president, and up until Samuel Doe, and Samuel Doe did not overthrow the government until the 1980s. Americo-Liberians had always been presidents of Liberia, even though they were only 5% of the population. But under Tubman, a guy named Tubman, who ruled up until about the 1970s and the 1980s, Liberia enjoyed tremendous economic prosperity. Liberia was the envy of a lot of West African nations. Tubman attracted foreign investment. He reduced a lot of crime. He reduced. Um, Liberia became prosperous under Tubman. He was a capitalist. Then when Tolbert came around, Tolbert made some bad economic mismanagement. Plus, he kind of ruled with an iron fist. Well, and also he was an Americo-Liberian. Well, Samuel Doe was descendants from native Liberians. He was a sergeant in the Liberian military. Well, Samuel Doe had overthrew President Tolbert, and he declared native. He declared um, that the native Liberians rule Liberia. Now, with that being said, that didn't last very long. Now, while Charles Taylor was probably not an Americo-Liberian, he was definitely American educated. He overthrew the Samuel Doe government, but then there was oppression from Samuel Doe on light-skinned native Americo-Liberians. Also told a lot of Americo-Liberians and their descendants to leave. And many descendants of Americo-Liberians are no longer there. Many of them had fled to the United States under Samuel Doe's regime. With that being said, the United States recognized Samuel Doe's regime. The hostility was towards Americo-Liberians, not towards the United States. Both groups, the Native Liberians and the Americo-Liberians, were both friendly to the United States. Because the United States condemned a lot of the practices the Americo-Liberians were implementing on the Native Liberians. So Liberia is one of the U.S.'s closest allies, and about 92% of Liberians have a favorable opinion of the United States, regardless. The flag of Liberia is red, white, and blue, and it has one star, though, instead of 50. The Liberian flag and the American flag are almost identical. But when Charles Taylor overthrew Samuel Doe, there was, from 1991 to about 2003, there was a civil war between Charles Taylor's forces and the rebel forces, and there was hostility on both sides. The rebel forces would cut off people's hands. If you didn't do what they told you to do. They also recruited child soldiers. Charles Taylor's government kind of did too. And the rebels also, before going into battle, they would drink enemies' blood sometimes and get drunk and high, and then go out and try to fight against Charles Taylor's forces. Now, Charles Taylor's forces were guilty of human rights abuses too. As a result of that 12-year civil war, 250,000 Liberians lost their lives. Now, here's how it ended. Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, who was president of Liberia recently, up until about 2018, her and a bunch of women protested the war. They went out and they said, no more war. They said, we're not going to participate in the war. We're not going to send our kids to participate. And they told their husbands that we will leave you if you go participate in this war. And did that work? It halfway worked, but a lot of the credit also went to a lot of Liberians were putting bodies near the U.S. Embassy, showing the United States how bad this Civil War was. And the U.S. officials saw that, and they put U.S. ships off the coast of Liberia. And then a lot of Nigerian troops came in there, and they quelled the Civil War in 2003. So when the U.S. Embassy saw how bad the Liberian Civil War was, when bodies were being dumped right outside the U.S. Embassy, the American forces responded. And Charles Taylor said he was not going to leave Liberia or step down as president until the UN forces arrived. And with U.S. approval, Nigerian forces under the UN flag arrived, and Charles Taylor stepped down as he said he would. And they had an interim president called Moses Blah after that. But then shortly after Moses Blah, a lady named Ellen Johnson Sirleaf won the election of the presidency. Was there some corruption? Yes. But as Chris White pointed out in his last stream, the U.S. government had to okay any transactions above $50 US in any of the Liberian government ministries. And Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, she also attracted a lot of foreign investment, and Liberia was coming out of the ashes, and more people were being lifted out of poverty. Now, with that being said, because there was some minor corruption in the government, even though a lot of the corruption accusations had not been proven, some of the poor people in Liberia had gotten poorer. And George Weah claimed he was 100% native, not descendant from the Americo-Liberians. And so he won the last election. Plus, George Weah was popular because he was a former soccer player in Liberia. And in Liberia, soccer is the most popular sport in Liberia. And so George Weah won, but then George Weah, now, as Chris White pointed out, Liberia did pay their debt to the African Union. Bruce said, what do I do for a living? Good question, Brew. I was a security guard until my mom was diagnosed with cancer. And after she had gotten diagnosed, I helped take care of her. Now I'm helping my dad. But as soon as I get my second COVID-19 vaccine, because my dad's a high risk patient because of his health issues with heart problems, I will be going back to work. But he's a high risk COVID-19. If he ever gets the COVID-19, he goes to the ICU immediately because he had bypass surgery back in 2012 and he has a defibrillator there right now. So I will be back as a security guard as soon as I get my second injection and wait for a 2-week period, more than likely. But I was a security guard before that happened. Now, private security guards in the United States and in South Africa are way different. I mean, private security guards, typically in America, it's a reasonably safe job. I was a police cadet until I injured my back. Then that didn't work out because I had back injuries. But we are there to back up the police and amid an emergency. It's not like in South Africa where private security guards get called before the police do. So, good question. So, okay, back to what I was talking about in Liberia. All right, Liberia. Okay, so George Weah had imposed a ridiculous tax on rice, which killed a lot of rice farmers' business, and the food is not being distributed to the poor. I mean, it's just a cluster. Now, they did pay off the debt to the African Union, as Chris White pointed out, so they get their voting rights back. Also, Liberia has handled the COVID-19 very well. When you come in the country, you are automatically tested and quarantined until the test results get back for the COVID-19. And then any Liberians who are leaving the country, they are tested immediately upon arrival back, and they're quarantined until their test results come back negative. So they've done a good job handling the COVID-19 crisis under George Weah, and I have to give them credit on that. They have done a good job overall. The reason that there was some COVID-19 issues, and you can't blame the people for this, the George Weah government is not handling the rape crisis very well. At least 70 to 80% of Liberian women have been raped, and that's the same statistics as when it was going on in the Civil War. You have a very vast worldview for a security guard. No, I just know what it is in South Africa versus the United States. I'm not speaking for other countries, but I do know that private security companies are typically not the first people that they call in an emergency. I mean, we're first responders, but rarely does a security guard get called before the police. Well, they may get called before the police, but then the police come. I mean, the security guard does about 10 to 20% of the work. The police do 80%. Let's just put it that way in a situation like that. Okay. All right, Brew. I hope you're not a troll, but those were just very random questions on what I was talking about. Really hope you're not a troll, dude. Pray you're not. But okay. Anyway, but George Weah was not dealing with the rape crisis very well, and the rape crisis has not gotten better since the Civil War happened. What did I do in Korea, but Sarko? I taught for the South Korean Air Force. I don't know if you saw that stream with Chris Wyatt, but I taught English for the South Korean Air Force. I was a civilian English teacher, not a soldier. And that's how I learned a lot about the South African Air Force's involvement in the Korean War, the SAF's involvement. That's what I did. So I was an English teacher there for 2 years for the South Korean Air Force. Okay. Here we go. And talk about, okay, George Weah didn't deal with the rape crisis very well, and the rape statistics were the same as they were in the Civil War. So in this one case, and it was a pretty sick situation, a 3-year-old girl was raped, and the rapist cut around that area to be able to rape her. It was just sick. And the country of Liberia, like nationwide, protested the violence against women over there and the rape crisis. Well, a lot of the protesters didn't take proper precaution. They let their emotions get the best of them. Now, in this case, I can see why. A lot of them weren't wearing a mask and they weren't social distancing, and COVID came not rampantly, but that's probably why they have over 1,000 COVID-19 cases. Other than that, they've done a pretty good job securing. I mean, they've done a pretty good job containing the COVID-19, but also keeping a lot of their businesses open. So their economy has actually increased since the COVID-19 crisis. They're one of the few countries that have actually done that. So you have to respect that.